be another workshop, and today was another different workshop that you're attending, and you're just kind of wondering, I attended trauma on Tuesday. I'm wondering, what was that one point midway that Stefan was going over. Don't worry. If you can't re-attend any of these workshops, we are going to be posting the recordings on our website. Of course, we are working on that. We don't have an update as of yet. So keep your ear to the rail, as they would say, as to updates and when that will be made readily available on our website. The second reason we bring your attention to the fact that we're recording this is that anything that comes from your end, whether it be visually or audibly, is being recorded, is being immortalized. We are posting these PD workshops in totality, in their whole uncompromised form on our website. So just be cognizant as to what you are sharing with the world and your colleagues in this Zoom meeting. You'll notice that whenever any individual speaks, their picture typically shows up on your display. So it may not necessarily matter if it's, visual or audio. You may not even realize that you're sharing it. Just be cognizant. Do this little self-check and conduct yourselves accordingly. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Rosy, and I will hang around for a brief minute or so to answer any lingering questions that the group might have.
So Brian, I have one question that a couple of the participants were asking about.
Okay.
With, for example, Justin St. Peter's wants them to turn in evidence that they've done 12 PDs by May 1st. And there's a question about access to the certificate. So when they participate in this, do they get a certificate that's emailed to them?
They do not. And the reasoning behind that is the fact that we are putting on an online PD not almost every single day of the week. And some of these PDs, most of these PDs exceed 75 to 100 individuals. That's just simply too many certificates that we can pragmatically visually manufacture, as it were, and distribute accordingly. The people power behind that would be so immense that it's just unrealistic for us to issue certificates. And we have made a policy from the beginning that we would not be issuing formal certificates for these workshops.
But Brian, people are signing in, or there's like an attendance that will be shared, that information will be shared with the district, correct?
We are working on attendance. That I'm having that conversation with Jennifer as to how exactly we are going to access attendance and work with directors as to how we can communicate with them who is attending. I think this is a conversation that a lot of participants need to have with their district administrator as to what form of proof. I mean, proof is a pretty amorphous word. What does that mean? Will an OMS confirmation essentially satisfy that requisite? If so, the confirmation email that you receive through OMS, unless it's going to spam, should satisfy that. Are they going to require that you prove the time duration that you were there? Then that's going to be a little bit more of a tricky and moving target. So I would say get the clarification from the district level. I know that some districts are asking for a more like, for example, I think I understand that carpentry is requiring a blog post or a sort of like a report on some type of website interface to sort of prove that they attended the professional development workshop. So I think it's a conversation that a lot of individuals need to have with their administrator. And if there's any lingering sort of resources that they are lacking that we can provide, they can always email me at beheld@sbceo.org. My emails are pretty impacted these days. I'm finding that my inbox is quite stacked, as I'm sure everybody's is. So please don't stress out if my turnaround is a little bit lagging these days. But yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
You are very welcome. Have a great PD, everybody.
Thank you. So a couple of things with that. So for the Hope School District team, it sounds like you not only have an option of printing a certificate, but you can also do a summary of the professional development that you attend. So like Brian said, for all of you guys that are being asked to provide some kind of verification that you went to the professional training, go back to whoever your direct supervisor is. So like for the Hope School District, you're going to direct those questions to Justin. but a summary with the title and the name of the presenter should work well. So Susan, does that make sense? Susan can hear me. Hopefully she can hear me.
I forgot to unmute myself.
There you go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that information. And I'll just write summaries if I can't figure out, and take pictures of the certificates also.
Yes.
That was good. Good advice. Thank you.
You can always take a picture of my mug talking. Just and say, here, she went. I attended. I forget who was Nikki, and I'm totally forgetting on who was the other person that was asking questions about signing up for, Cynthia, signing up for, I think, the 17th and the 24th.
I signed up for the 17th as well. Is that the same as this one?
No. So there's a little bit of confusion with the different classes that the SELPA is offering. So my classes and the ones that Jennifer Connolly are doing, they're different every week. So those of you who came last week had a different training with me. Those of you who came with me on the first, we did a whole talk about narratives and a bunch of different things. Next week, we're going to continue on the Affirm modules, but it's going to be a continuation of today and additional stuff. Okay. For everybody else, it's going to be the same talk over and over. So for example, Nikki had signed up for the self-care training on the 17th and the 24th with Allison Lindsay. You only need to go to one of those because it's the exact same training both days. Okay. So if it's for me, if you signed up with me, you're going to get a different training. I'll talk about similar content, but it's going to be a different training. Okay. And I typically refer to my previous trainings. Does that answer questions about that?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So a couple of other housekeeping things. I'm going to share my screen with you guys in a little bit. And, oh, before I forget, if you haven't in the chat box, if you want to write your name and what district you're from, that would be great. Okay, so I have a question. Are the 20th and the 27th the same dates? So let me look at that. Yes. So the ones on the 20th and the 27th are also the same.
So I'm sorry, the one on the 29th, your other class, the autism class, that's a continuation from today's class?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, perfect. That's just want to make sure I wouldn't be taking this in class.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything that you sign up with me and Jennifer Connolly is going to be a continuation or a whole different subject. With the other presenters, it's the exact same presentation. Okay.
Rosie, I'm sorry. I don't have that chat on my tablet.
It's okay.
And then also Fabiola is here with me.
Yes.
I think Ryan was, sound like he said when he was talking that we shouldn't do that, but.
You can email him. Yeah, it's totally fine. I'm working so closely with Bev that if there's any question about you or Fabi attending,
I'm gonna write Fabi's name.
You can.
Okay, can you write my name too? Because I don't have that chat on my thing.
Yeah.
On my tablet. Thank you.
And don't stress if you don't have the chat option.
Okay.
People just seem to like to write their name there. It automatically, when you signs in, it's going to, say you're attending. And if there's any questions, if, for example, your district's like, oh, you signed up for Rosy's talk, but there's no confirmation that you went, you guys all have my contact info. Just contact me and I can confirm for you. Okay. Now, in terms of the chat, just remember that whatever you're writing there, at the end of this Zoom, it gets saved. So when we first started doing the Zoom sessions at the beginning of April, people were having they thought they were having private conversations. They're not private. Okay. So, and then a couple of other norms. Hi, Fabi. A couple of other norms that I want to remind you guys of. I want to encourage everybody to be muted because it just minimizes the echo that we all hear. But I don't want it to be just me talking constantly. But if you guys are writing questions in the chat for me, I'm not going to be able to pay attention to that. I know that some people are really good at like, you know, seeing people's questions and comments in the chat in Zoom. I don't. It's beyond my my comfort level and my age level. I'm like, I can't attend to both of those things. So if you have a question or a comment, just jump in. Now, my style is that about every 3 or 4 slides, I am going to pause and ask if anybody has questions or if anybody has comments. If I don't do that after like 4 or 5 slides, somebody, there's like 80 of us in this Zoom, somebody just say, oh, Rosie, can you pause? And even if you don't have anything to say, I just appreciate that prompt. Okay, so I'm going to share with you guys my screen. You're going to see my very messy computer. So you should see my inbox. And let me pull up my presentation for today. Okay, I think we're going to be in business. Okay, does everybody see my screen? Naturalistic behavioral interventions and pivotal response training for students with autism and developmental delays. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I see it.
Perfect. Okay, so we're going to today have a number of learner objectives, and those of you who've come to my previous trainings know that my overall goal in our PDs is that we create a space where this is a learning community. So there's no stupid questions, there are no stupid comments. There's enough stressors that we're all globally experiencing, right? This is like a global traumatic experience for everybody. All of our routines have been changed. All of our everyday existence is turned upside down, and we're overall just anxious and stressed. Just a second, I need to close this so you guys don't hear my toddler. So my primary objective in my specific PDs is I want us to be able to have a learning community where we just come together, whether it be once a week or once a month that you join me, and it's not a stressful time. It's an opportunity to share knowledge, share experience, and grow with each other. Now, before we actually get started, I like starting my PDs every time with a moment towards like gratitude. And so there's wonderful science on how if we practice gratitude, even if it's literally at the end of the day and we just remind ourselves, oh, I was really grateful for that really warm cup of coffee first thing in the morning, it makes an impact in our brain and our body chemistry. And the more that you practice it, the more the benefits you reap from that. So I want us to take 5 to 10 seconds and have all of us think of something that we're grateful for right now. And then I'm going to ask some of you to unmute and share what you're grateful for. Okay, who would like to share something they're grateful for? Go ahead and jump in. You don't have to raise your hand, just jump in.
I'm happy. I mentor some young girls that are having a hard time in life, and I'm really grateful in this time of need to be able to get outside myself and be of service to another person.
Beautiful. That's wonderful, Nikki.
Well, I'm grateful that I'm healthy and now my family is being healthy, and I'm grateful because my husband works at the hospital and it's been really stressful when he comes back from work, thinking that he's going to come back sick. But thanks God, he's been very healthy.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm grateful for the technology that we're all participating in right now.
Wonderful.
Actually, I'm grateful my neighbor did a Costco run for me yesterday. I had my green tea.
Great.
I'm grateful for my family and for our community that we've managed to really take care of each other. That's really one of the, I feel very blessed for where we live and the people around us.
And I'm grateful that we live in a really beautiful place with great weather where we can still go out and walk and move our bodies, because that has helped a lot during this time.
I'm grateful for the extra time I've had with my kids and family. Being home, it's been nice to be able to just pause and have that time that normally in our everyday busy lives we don't have. So that's something I'm grateful for.
I'm grateful for this moment that we're taking, you know, to be grateful for everything. And and I'm grateful just right now. We are here like community.
Yes.
I'm thankful for you, Rosie, for creating this for all of us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Anyone else? I just think this is a really great way for every time we come together to just kind of ground ourselves in that, because there's so much uncertainty and there's just so much overall emotion involved in everything. And we are all extremely fortunate to still have our jobs and being paid. And so I anchor myself in being incredibly thankful that I get to spend, you know, every Wednesday morning with you guys and share some of the things that I love and that I've learned about. So I want to kind of review, with that all being said, what are major anchors for today. And we're not going to get through all the content today. This is going to continue in my next PD. But we're going to start off talking about the Affirm modules. I know that for those of you who are here from the San Ynez Valley Consortium, you're familiar with us because I've been doing some of these with you. We just started doing these with you. And for some of you, these are going to be brand new. And if it's not brand new to you, this is just a little review and a refresher. And so I apologize if you're going to be a little bit bored with that, but it's always good. I always find that I can deliver the same PD 50 times and I literally learn something or I'm reminded of something every time I deliver it. So it's just a good, especially when we're in a heightened stress time, it's just kind of good to have things repeated. And then we're going to dive into the two main Affirm modules that I'm going to cover with you guys: naturalistic intervention and then PRT. And I'm going to escape from the PowerPoint for a second because I want to make sure that you all got the three. There should have been 4 attachments for my PD. There should have been the PowerPoint, and then there should have been 3 really colorful, beautiful packets from the Affirm website. And I'm going to go over them relatively quickly. You don't have to print these out. These are just, some individuals don't have access to downloading stuff into their device. So I thought I'll just go ahead and email it and attach it and you have it available. So the first one is a discussion of like the components of what the Affirm modules are. So Affirm stands for Autism Focused Intervention Resources and Modules. So in California is a very unique state in many, many ways, but and one of the ways that we're unique is that there is an agency called CAPTAIN. It's the California Autism Partnership for Training and a couple other acronyms, Intervention of Network. I always forget the full acronym, but it's a, CAPTAIN is a multi-component agency that the California Department of Education has all the smartest people in the state putting together the best evidence-based practices that research has identified at our current point in time and making it available to educators. So they have a wonderful website. It's www.captain.org and ton of materials on there. I'm actually going to show you that website. Because if you're looking for time to do webinars, this is actually a really great way for you to do it. So it's captain.ca.gov. So this is the Captain website. And so there's a ton of information that you can learn from and refer to for supporting students with autism. So remember, just because something is on a website for students with autism doesn't mean it's only for students with autism. Anything that's an evidence-based strategy for a student with autism is an evidence-based strategy for a human being, so for any kid. The Affirm modules, there's a link for it on here that you can also go back to. So this document, the overview of the Affirm modules, it really explains to you everything that the modules are supposed to be. So there are 27 modules on the Affirm website on scientific evidence-based strategies that you can use with students with autism. And this overview document, the component one, tells you a little description of what the module is and then how long it's going to take. So for example, the cognitive behavioral intervention module explains to you, what it's going to be about, and it tells you it's going to take about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So the module on differential reinforcement is going to take about 2.5 to 3 hours. Very few of them take more than 3 hours. Most of them take anywhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours. So for example, the functional communication training one takes an hour and a half to 2 hours. If we look at the naturalistic intervention module, you're going to see that it takes an hour and a half to 2 hours. So this document kind of gives you a little review. And then for each specific module, there is a packet that comes with all the information that you're going to get from this module. So like for the naturalistic intervention module, it's going to tell you like things to know about before you start. And it's going to tell you, now that you're ready to start, here are the things for you to kind of keep in mind. And it's going to review the information that you're going to learn in the module, right? And they're beautiful. They're laid out really easily for people to use. They have great data sheets that you can use. They have examples of how to fill out the data sheet. And so they're just really helpful things that as you're having to do webinars or professional development for your time that you're getting paid to work, that's an option for you. Oops. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go online to show you how to get to the Affirm modules. Okay, so if we were to go to Google and type in AFIRM, Affirm modules is going to pop up. You click on that, and this is going to be what you'll see. You'll see this main link right here. It says Affirm modules. And I highly advise that after our time today, when we finish at 11, that you all go do this. So you all go to the modules, you click on it, and you're going to have to sign up. So you're going to create your own account. I highly recommend that you use your work email address as your username. So you literally are going to create a username, you're going to put your email address, you're going to create a password. When it's occupation, it's going to give you a lot of options. Most of us are going to pick the para-educator, instructional assistant. If you're not really sure what your category is, you can just always pick other. Don't stress about these pieces. Like for example, age range. People had asked, oh, but I cover more ages than this. Don't worry, just pick what is, the closest, and it's fine. Okay, so then.
I'm sorry, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I'm a teacher with Santa Maria Joint Union High School District. And technically we're on spring break, but I'm doing this anyway because I can't really go anywhere for spring break. Anyhow, So I'm just kind of curious. So you're saying we need to go, is this so?
I'm not saying
I would like, go
do.
ahead.
I highly advise that you do. So part of this training and the one that that's the second one I'm going to do following this one is to explain to people how to use the Affirm modules. And I'm going to do like a mini presentation on a couple of the modules. The Affirm modules are a fantastic resource. So when Jennifer Connolly at the SELPA said, hey, Rosie, what do you want to present on? I'm like, well, I'm going to present twice on behavior because I'm the behavior specialist for the SELPA, so I need to do that. But I do want to also present on the Affirm modules because I think they're a resource in California, and it's available for everyone, not just in California. But it's a resource that very few educators I find know about.
Yeah, I didn't know about it, so I really appreciate it. Thank you.
And I think that it's just one of those things that you can use it and do at any point in time. And so, yes, right now we're all in shelter in place, so this is a great time for us to go and learn evidence-based practices. But it's also a great resource to share with your parents or to share with the paraeducators in your class. So I had a teacher tell me yesterday that she's like, oh man, I really wish I would have known about these because like every year I get at least one new instructional assistant and they don't know anything about autism and I don't really have a lot of time to like do hands-on training. I could have just told them, hey, go learn on this. So this is why I wanted to do the Affirm modules, because I think I have been in the world of autism for 20 years. I did my PhD at UCSB with Bob and Lynn Cagle, who are the developers of PRT, and I didn't know about the Affirm modules until 2 years ago. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a secret that everyone needs to know about.
That's great, but it's okay if I don't do all of it today. Like I can do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Heck no. There's no way you're going to get it all done today.
No, I know. I mean, not today, but yes.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to keep doing it as like we're on this stay-at-home thing. So okay.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you.
When you take these module classes, is what they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are they a set time, or is it you're looking at information? So like I can do this at say 9 o'clock in the evening.
Yes. So this is why
Okay,
I
good.
wanted to introduce everybody to the Affirm modules, is because it is literally you can do it at any time.
Okay.
Like don't do this, but like the other night it was like almost midnight and my head, I couldn't turn off my head. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go look at this one. I haven't seen this one yet. I wonder what these videos are like. So I just literally opened it up, watched 20 minutes, and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go to bed. All right, and then the great thing, so let me show you guys. So once you create your own account, you go to the login. So mine's permanently saved because like, who's gonna wanna hack into my Affirm modules? And if they do, they can learn something.
And I'm gonna put out an email. I just sent them all an email of what to do. But I am doing a staff meeting. I'm trying to get a staff meeting done, but I need to meet with you guys first, which is today. And then I'm going to put in.
I think that's not a conversation we're supposed to be listening to. Okay, so that's why I have the mute button. So once you sign in, so you're going to see my account right here. So, and it's going to give you so if you click on the Affirm modules here, it's going to literally list all the different modules. And all you do is, hey, you want to do the Introduction to Autism Spectrum Disorders? You click that, and it's going to tell you exactly what you're going to learn. It's going to tell you how long it's going to take. And it usually gives you an extra like article to read if you want to, and then all you do is click view module. So then you literally just click on the blue icon and it's going to start it for you. So give it a sec. So do you see how it says, would you like to resume where you left off? So I showed another team how to do this. And that's the great thing. You have to like zoom in to help one of your students and support your teacher. You can stop and you can resume where you were. It picks up where you had left off.
During this module, you will learn to answer the questions. What is autism? What characteristics do you commonly see in learners with autism? How can we support learners with autism in the classroom? If you are viewing this module, you have likely already interacted with a child with autism.
So the great thing is that it literally is going to like read it to you, right? If for some reason you don't want to hear it, you want to read it all, you can go to transcript, and it literally tells you for each slide what is going to be said. Okay. So I'm going to get out of this and again, and I want to show you guys a couple of things. Okay, so when you first create your account, if it gives you the option to do a certificate, do the certificate. It's totally free. So for example, if I'm going to go look at the different Affirm modules, what's one that I haven't done yet? I haven't done this one, so I'm going to start this one. It usually gives you an option, which this one doesn't, to have a certificate. It's free to get the certificate. You don't pay anything. The only difference with the ones that are options for certificates, let's see if I can find another one. So this one's not giving me that option either. But when you're given the option to do the certificate, the only difference is they're going to give you like a pre-quiz and then a post-quiz. Don't worry about the quizzes. This is a research website. So the reason that they have those pre and post quizzes are just to see how effective they are at teaching us things. No one is going to send your boss that results of that quiz. You don't have to be like, oh my gosh, I didn't learn anything. It's literally for their research, so that they're constantly trying to make the website easier and better to use. So if you have that option for the certificate, pick it. It's free. They send you a certificate, and then, for example, like Susan, you can either take a picture or you can email that certificate to whoever is in charge of your like paperwork for this time. Any questions about signing up for this?
Rosie, I have a question. Being I had trouble the other day with it, resuming to where I left off. I never had the option. It never had that screen where it says, do you want to resume? And on the first page, it says, this is the last place or page. I click on that and it just returns to the beginning of that particular page. So I'm wondering if it matters if I use this on an iPad versus a computer. Do you know?
I've used it on my phone. So the other night when I wasn't able to sleep, I literally just watching it on my phone. So I think it's because people are trying to use this more. There are a lot of districts that are asking. So like Lompoc Unified has given the Affirm modules as some of the options for their instructional staff to be working. So I think that the mistake I made with your group, Lori, was I had you guys start with the intro to ASD, and I think everybody was trying to do it at the same time. I'm hoping that you guys go do the other modules and you won't have those issues.
Yeah, you mentioned that the other day. I didn't know if that was just on the resume part or the freezing part. You know what I mean? So, okay.
Whenever I've stopped, I've always had, when I've gone back to that module, I picked it up, even like months later, it says, do you want to resume where you were? So I've never had the glitch. I did email them last Thursday, and I haven't heard back because I think, just like Brian said, I think that everybody's so flooded. And so I think they're aware that there's like technical glitches. I actually have a colleague of mine that works for them, and I sent her a text. I'm like, hey, some of the people that I'm supporting are getting kicked out. And she replied saying, yeah, we've gotten a lot of feedback. We're trying to resolve it. So that was the best that we got. Thank you for asking that, Lori. Any other questions?
Rosie, can you show which ones and how we find that it has a certificate, since we have to submit a certificate?
You don't have to submit a certificate. So I was trying to see if there were any, like yesterday, I started doing the naturalistic. Let's see if this one is. Usually for me, it's given me the option for the certificate when I first click it. And so, I don't know.
Isn't this the certificate that we have to give to Justin, though?
No, I mean, if you're doing, so let's see this one. Yeah, for some reason, it's not really.
We're supposed to do 12 of
right.
them.
It should give you, oh, here it is at the bottom.
Okay.
I'm a ding dong, sorry. So if you go to the very bottom, so let's go look at the other modules. That's the other one that,
So you have to choose before you start that you want a certificate.
Yes, oh, there it is. So I'm a ding dong, ignore everything I said. You just go to the very bottom and it starts certificate track. So you click on that and that's where it's gonna give you the pre-assessment.
Okay.
So it should be for every single one of the modules. So again, if I go to the very top and I just click Affirm modules, it's gonna give me this page. And then here are all the different options: Intro to ASD, antecedent-based intervention, cognitive behavioral intervention. Let's say I wanna do this one. I'm gonna click select module and I should just go to the bottom. Yep, certificate track.
Perfect, thank you.
That, and then you just do the pre-assessment.
Perfect, thank you.
So thank you for bringing that up, Cynthia, because I was
Rosy,
like, oh, where is it?
Rosie, what is the earn CE credits? What is that?
So continuing education credits. So for example, for me to be a board certified behavior analyst, every 2 years, I have to submit 36 continuing education units. You either go to professional conferences or you do webinars. Teaching some of these classes, I get to submit I get 6 units for every 2 years for teaching classes like this. So this is, you can go in here and click that. It doesn't really apply for you unless you have you're a school psychologist or you're a BCBA or you're a mental health specialist. So for example, if I needed, the BACB is the governing board that licenses and certifies behavior specialists. So if I need continuing education credits, I can sign up for this. Okay, but that doesn't really apply for you guys. And there is a fee for doing this because they have to issue something saying that, Dr. Rosie did that. For you guys, just doing the Affirm modules, clicking that, and then let's pick another one. Let's do exercise. And then if I go all the way to the bottom, there's the certificate track, click it, and then,
and then we can just submit those certificates. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And so, and again, this is autism focused intervention, but I want to emphasize that there's not a single, these are all scientific evidence-based strategies. And so there's not a single strategy on here that you can't just use with human beings overall, right? It's not that, oh, I can't use this with students with ADHD, or, oh, I can't use this with any of my resource kids. No, you can use all of these strategies. They may look differently depending on the age that you're applying it, or the level of skill or the need that the student has, but these are evidence-based strategies that are just good teaching strategies. And that's why and on top of that, and the fact that you can just do it at any point in time, it's not like it's set from 9 to 11 every day, like these SELPA trainings, right? You guys have the freedom of being able to do it. So any other questions about this? And it's okay if you guys come up with other questions. You should have gotten my contact email. You can just contact me.
Rosie?
Uh-huh.
It's Angie. I have a question. So, you gave us these 2 other modules to do by the next meeting. Are you going to be
separate from this?
Okay. Are you going to be asking us to do different ones, or can we just go and do them?
You can do different ones. So, I don't need, for the people who are here for this SELPA training, I'm not assigning you anything. Angie is part of the Santa Ynez Valley Consortium, and they have me doing something specific for them. And I'm assigning specific modules because we meet each week and we have a book club.
Oh, okay. I get it now.
Right. But for the SELPA meeting, you guys don't have to go and do anything in specific.
Oh, okay.
You can just show up and, the next time I do this, and I'm going to be continuing this conversation.
Okay, I get you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay. So, all right. So we did a little overview of the Affirm modules, and I went over how to kind of create your own account. Highly encourage you to use this as a platform for your learning during this time. And then today, I'm going to specifically focus on the naturalistic intervention module and the PRT module. I'm not going to open those up. You can go on your own time and do those modules, but this is where I did my PhD. So I did my PhD at UCSB with Robert and Lynn Cagle, who are two of the founders of PRT. And so I thought, you know what, this is a really practical way for me to share with you a little bit more of my training. And that way, if you decide you want to do the naturalistic intervention or the PRT module, you kind of have additional background when you're going into it. Okay, so we talked about that the Afirm modules have 27 evidence-based practices. This is Captain is that autism organization, and they work really closely with the UC Davis Mind Institute. And if you haven't heard of the Mind Institute at UC Davis, it was created probably now 15, 20 years ago. But when in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, when autism research really became a big focus, the bunch of brilliant people got together with a huge donation and created the Mind Institute at UC Davis. And basically the smartest people in all areas of autism research are now, have been recruited from other universities, are now working there and doing incredible work. Here is the Captain website that you can go visit, and the Afirm modules website. And so I want to talk a little bit about autism, and for today, I'm going to play a number of videos. I think that the way that I learned best is that it's not always like, you know, hearing one person talk. It works better to have different ways and of hearing different people explain the same information, or you know, video examples. And so I was able to find a number of things that I think are really helpful and super important to spend this time together kind of reviewing about autism. So ASD stands for Autism Spectrum Disorder. And in a few minutes, I'm going to play a couple of videos for you that really kind of talk about the history of autism and perspectives about like why there's such a high rate of autism. But what I want to emphasize is that there was a point in time when we were all in school that we didn't really ever hear the word autism really until like Rain Man came out. Most of us didn't know what autism was. And it was mainly because, oh, those are the special need kids that are in the portable in the back of the school, right? But autism used to be a very narrowly defined thing that was very specific. And one of the TED Talks I'm going to play for you is going to really talk about how we kind of got stuck there and where we are now. But now what our science community understands is that autism isn't just one thing, it's a spectrum. And we can really say that most things in humanity are a spectrum. Most of us are social on a spectrum, right? There's some of us who are a little bit shyer, that in bigger settings, we're not as extroverted. But in our family setting or the settings that we feel really good or comfortable, we're really vibrant and funny and way more like engaging. So we all move on the spectrum of everything, right? But autism spectrum disorder is a really great way of categorizing that the symptoms of autism, while they all, you know, the criteria fall under social difficulties, communication difficulties, and then behavioral difficulties, right? They vary. And so each individual student's experience with autism is going to look very different depending on really how many of their symptoms they have in each of these areas, how severe. Now, the one thing I do want to mention about autism that I don't know that either of the two TED Talks I'm going to play for you in a few minutes share is that there is nothing about autism that's unique to autism. We all have, there's a great talk that I heard years ago by a presenter who has high functioning autism, that we all have a little bit of autism, which is true. It's just that we're on the end of the autism spectrum that's not diagnosable, right? So all of us have things on the autism spectrum. What makes an individual have a diagnosis of autism is the rate of the behavior. So how the frequency and the severity of the behavior, and the developmental appropriateness. So when we're all babies, we all mouth everything. We all love staring at fans. Those of you who've had children all know that, like, your 3 and 4 month old find fans the most fascinating thing. That does not mean that every 3 or 4 month old who's fascinated by a fan is stimming on the fan and therefore has autism. It's developmentally appropriate, right, to put things in your mouth at those ages, and, you know, to stare at, you know, visual objects and do visual inspection. But if you're 4 and you're still mouthing things constantly as your main way of interacting with the world, and you still are preoccupied with fans, and you're not able to disengage from your interest in fans and engage in what's happening in front of you, that developmental inappropriateness could be a symptom of autism. Okay, so I want you guys to know it's the duration, the developmental appropriateness, and the intensity. We all, those of us who've experienced and worked with students with autism know that no matter like how many symptoms and how severe they are, their student has a majority of individuals on the autism spectrum struggle with flexibility. Every human being struggles with flexibility. Right now, during a world pandemic, we're seeing how we all struggle with flexibility, right? I see heads nodding. So again, it's the developmental appropriateness and it's the clinical significance of that. 2 of the talks are going to mention how autism is a biological neurological disability. So this is something that's present at birth. So it's not refrigerator mothers, which was a very common belief in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that it was refrigerator mothers. Mothers are always blamed for everything that caused their child's autism. When I was a graduate student at UCSB, I had a very unique experience with one of the first, with a mother and son, one of the first kids that received discrete trial training with Dr. Lovas at UCLA. And I'll talk about Dr. Lovas in a little bit. And he was one of the kids that really never responded to treatment. And when they were at our clinic at UCSB, his mother was 83 years old and he was 54. And he was still nonverbal, and he was still engaged in a lot of self-stimulatory behavior, a lot of hand flapping, body rocking. And his mother, when he was 2, had been told by her pediatrician that the fact that she was a cold woman had been so traumatic to her son that it had caused him to retreat inward. And so this is a woman who had literally spanned from the 1940s until, you know, we're talking about 2010, decades of different types of treatment for her son, to the point where now in 2010, when I met her, that she knew science had said, no, moms don't cause this. Refrigerator, poor parenting doesn't cause autism. But she still carried, like when we were having this conversation with her, there was still this part of it. She literally said, I know that you all now say that, you know, parenting, bad mothers don't cause autism. But that was so traumatic for me that I will go to my grave thinking that I caused my sweet boy, who's now a grown man, to become autistic. So I say this because there's a lot of misinformation about what causes autism, and I believe that 2 of the TED Talks are going to talk about those, and I'll circle back to it. So this is something that's not caused by bad parenting. It's not caused by trauma. This is something that is biological. It's just like the chances of being born with eyesight that isn't 20/20. Like, we would never say to a parent, your postpartum depression or your marital conflict caused your child to be born with imperfect, eyesight. We would think that we were crazy, but there was a very long time where that was the conversation, that was the narrative that parents were given, okay? Symptoms change with age. So just because your kindergarten student does a lot of hand flapping and is nonverbal, and every time they walk by the sandbox they want to put sand in their mouth, doesn't mean that that's how they're going to be demonstrating their autism forever. And that doesn't mean they're not going to be able to learn. The one thing that we know about humanity is that we can all learn, no matter how many symptoms or how significant they are. And I'm not going to talk about learned helplessness right now. I'm going to talk about that when we come back a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to pause right here. Any questions before I start playing videos?
Any questions? No, I'm fine.
I can't stand when they do this. This is where my technology strengths are going to be totally gone. All right, why is this not opening the one that I had queued up all the videos to? Okay. Well, I guess I'm going to have to go back and queue them up, because for some reason it's not opening. So we will be flexible with each other.
And now that's how.
All right, here we go. So if you can mute your area, that would be great. So I think if anyone's unmuted, mute. And then we're gonna, it's not a very long video, it's 15.5 minutes, but this is one of the most popular TED Talks on autism, and it's 5 years old. So the rate of autism that she quotes is no longer, I think she says it's 1 in 86 at this point. Right now, the CDC says that autism impacts 1 in every 54 children. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Why? Why is a question that parents ask me all the time. Why did my child develop autism? As a pediatrician, as a geneticist, as a researcher, we try and address that question. But autism is not a single condition. It's actually a spectrum of disorders. A spectrum that ranges, for instance, from Justin, a 13-year-old boy who's not verbal, who can't speak, who communicates by using an iPad to touch pictures to communicate his thoughts and his concerns. A little boy who, when he gets upset, will start rocking, and eventually when he's disturbed enough, will bang his head to the point that he can actually cut it open and require stitches. That same diagnosis of autism, though, also applies to Gabriel, another 13-year-old boy who has quite a different set of challenges. He's actually quite remarkably gifted in mathematics. He can multiply 3 numbers by 3 numbers in his head with ease. Yet when it comes to trying to have a conversation, he has great difficulty. He doesn't make eye contact. He has difficulty starting a conversation, feels awkward. And when he gets nervous, he actually shuts down. Yet both of these boys have the same diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. One of the things that concerns us is whether or not there really is an epidemic of autism. These days, 1 in 88 children will be diagnosed with autism. And the question is, why does this graph look this way? Has that number been increasing dramatically over time? Or is it because we have now started labeling individuals with autism, simply giving them the diagnosis?
Rosie, we lost sound.
Yeah, I don't hear it. It's glitching.
Rosie, you're muted.
Sorry, I cannot hear anything. And it stops.
Sorry, guys. So let me rewind a little bit. Can you guys make sure that you're all muted?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to start it over again. Make sure everybody's muted.
Time, or is it because we have now started labeling individuals with autism, simply giving them the diagnosis when they were still present there before, yet simply didn't have that label? And in fact, in the late 1980s, the early 1990s, legislation was passed that actually provided individuals with autism with resources, with access to educational materials that would help them. With that increased awareness, more parents, more pediatricians, more educators learned to recognize the features of autism. As a result of that, more individuals were diagnosed and got access to the resources they needed. In addition, we've changed our definition over time. And so in fact, we've widened the definition of autism, and that accounts for some of the increased prevalence that we see. The next question everyone wonders is, what caused autism? And a common misconception is that vaccines cause autism. But let me be very clear. Vaccines do not cause autism. In fact, the original research study that suggested that was the case was completely fraudulent. It was actually retracted from the journal Lancet in which it was published, and that author, a physician, had his medical license taken away from him. The Institutes of Medicine, the Centers for Disease Control have repeatedly investigated this, and there is no credible evidence that vaccines cause autism. Furthermore, one of the ingredients in vaccines, something called thimerosal, was thought to be what the cause of autism was. That was actually removed from vaccines in the year 1992, and you can see that it really did not have an effect in what happens with the prevalence of autism. So again, there is no evidence that this is the answer. So the question remains, what does cause autism? In fact, there's probably not one single answer. Just as autism is a spectrum, there's a spectrum of etiologies, a spectrum of causes. Based on epidemiological data, we know that one of the causes, or one of the associations, I should say, is advanced paternal age. That is, increasing age of the father at the time of conception. In addition, another vulnerable and critical period in terms of development is when the mother's pregnant. During that period, while the fetal brain is developing, we know that exposure to certain agents can actually increase the risk of autism. In particular, there's a medication, valproic acid, which mothers with epilepsy sometimes take, we know can increase that risk of autism. In addition, there can be some infectious agents that can also cause autism. And one of the things I'm going to spend a lot of time focusing on are the genes that can cause autism. I'm focusing on this not because genes are the only cause of autism, but it's a cause of autism that we can readily define and be able to better understand the biology and understand better how the brain works so that we can come up with strategies to be able to intervene. One of the genetic factors that we don't understand, however, is the difference that we see in terms of males and females. Males are affected 4 to 1 compared to females with autism. And we really don't understand what that causes. One of the ways that we can understand that genetics is a factor is by looking at something called the concordance rate. In other words, if one sibling has autism, what's the probability that another sibling in that family will have autism? And we can look in particular at 3 types of siblings. Identical twins, twins that actually share 100% of their genetic information and share the same intrauterine environment, versus fraternal twins, twins that actually share 50% of their genetic information, versus regular siblings, brothers, sisters, sisters, also sharing 50% of their genetic information, yet not sharing the same intrauterine environment. And when you look at those concordance ratios, one of the striking things that you will see is that in identical twins, that concordance rate is 77%. Remarkably though, it's not 100%. It is not that genes account for all of the risk for autism, but yet they account for a lot of that risk because when you look at fraternal twins, that concordance rate is only 31%. On the other hand, there is a difference between those fraternal twins and the siblings, suggesting that there are common exposures for those fraternal twins that may not be shared as commonly with siblings alone. So this provides some of the data that autism is genetic. Well, how genetic is it? When we compare it to other conditions that we're familiar with, things like cancer, heart disease, diabetes, in fact, genetics plays a much larger role in autism than it does in any of these other conditions. But with this, that doesn't tell us what the genes are. It doesn't even tell us in any one child, is it one gene or potentially a combination of genes? And so in fact, in some individuals with autism, it is genetic. That is, that it is one single powerful deterministic gene that causes the autism. However, in other individuals, it's genetic. That is, that it's actually a combination of genes, in part with the developmental process that ultimately determines that risk for autism. We don't know in any one person necessarily which of those two answers it is until we start digging deeper. So the question becomes, how can we start to identify what exactly those genes are? And let me pose something that might not be intuitive. In certain individuals, they can have autism for a reason that is genetic, but yet not because of autism running in the family. And the reason is because in certain individuals, they can actually have genetic changes or mutations that are not passed down from the mother or from the father, but actually start brand new in them. Mutations that are present in the egg or the sperm at the time of conception that have not been passed down generation through generation within the family. And we can actually use that strategy to now understand and to identify those genes causing autism in those individuals. So in fact, at the Simons Foundation, we took 2,600 individuals that had no family history of autism, and we took that child and their mother and father and used them to try and understand what were those genes causing autism.
Hey guys, I think somebody is unmuted and there's like background noise. Can everybody check to make sure that you're on mute? Sorry to be obnoxious, but it just makes it hard for people to concentrate because there's that feedback. Thank you, everybody.
In those cases.
83 people on this
To do that,
training.
we actually had to comprehensively be able to look at all that genetic and
I think somebody unpaused themselves, unmuted themselves.
Hello? Can you hear?
Yeah, we can hear you. So can you?
Okay, I thought I turned it.
Okay, I think it's now. Hopefully.
Information and determine what those differences were between the mother, the father, and the child. In doing so, I apologize, I'm going to use an outdated analogy of encyclopedias rather than Wikipedia, but I'm going to do so to try and help make the point that as we did this inventory, we needed to be able to look at massive amounts of information. Our genetic information is organized into a set of 46 volumes. And when we did that, we had to be able to count for each of those 46 volumes, because in some cases with autism, there's actually a single volume that's missing. We had to get more granular than that though, and so we had to start opening those books. And in some cases, the genetic change was more subtle. It might have been a single paragraph that was missing. Or yet, even more subtle than that, a single letter. 1 out of 3 billion letters that was changed, that was altered, yet had profound effects in terms of how the brain functions and affects behavior. In doing this within these families, we were able to account for approximately 25% of the individuals and determine that there was a single powerful genetic factor that caused autism within those families. On the other hand, there's 75% that we still haven't figured out. As we did this though, it was really quite humbling, because we realized that there was not simply one gene for autism. In fact, the current estimates are that there are 200 to 400 different genes that can cause autism. And that explains in part why we see such a broad spectrum in terms of its effects. Although there are that many genes, there is some method to the madness. It's not simply random, 200, 400 different genes, but in fact, they fit together. They fit together in a pathway. They fit together in a network that's starting to make sense now in terms of how the brain functions. We're starting to have a bottom-up approach where we're identifying those genes, those proteins, those molecules, understanding how they interact together to make that neuron work, understanding how those neurons interact together to make circuits work, and understand how those circuits work to now control behavior. And understand that both in individuals with autism as well as individuals who have normal cognition. But early diagnosis is a key for us. Being able to make that diagnosis of someone who's susceptible at a time in a window where we have the ability to transform, to be able to impact that growing, developing brain is critical. And so folks like Ami Klin have developed methods to be able to take infants, small babies, and be able to use biomarkers, in this case, eye contact and eye tracking, to identify an infant at risk. This particular infant, you can see making very good eye contact with this woman as she's singing Itsy Bitsy Spider, in fact, is not going to develop autism. This baby we know is going to be in the clear. On the other hand, this other baby is going to go on to develop autism. In this particular child, you can see it's not making good eye contact. Instead of the eyes focusing in and having that social connection, looking at the mouth, looking at the nose, looking off in another direction, but not again socially connecting. And being able to do this on a very large scale, screen infants, screen children for autism through something very robust, very reliable, is going to be very helpful to us in terms of being able to intervene at an early stage when we can have the greatest impact. How are we going to intervene? It's probably going to be a combination of factors. In part, in some individuals, we're going to try and use medications. And so in fact, identifying the genes for autism is important for us to identify drug targets, to identify things that we might be able to impact and can be certain that that's really what we need to do in autism. But that's not going to be the only answer. Beyond just drugs, we're going to use educational strategies. Individuals with autism, some of them are wired a little bit differently. They learn in a different way. They absorb their surroundings in a different way, and we need to be able to educate them in a way that serves them best. Beyond that, there are a lot of individuals in this room who have great ideas in terms of new technologies we can use. Everything from devices we can use to train the brain to be able to make it more efficient and to compensate for areas in which it has a little bit of trouble, to even things like Google Glass. You could imagine, for instance, Gabriel with his social awkwardness might be able to wear Google Glass with an earpiece in his ear and have a coach be able to help him, be able to help think about conversations, conversation starters, being able to even perhaps one day invite a girl out on a date. All of these new technologies just offer tremendous opportunities for us to be able to impact the individuals with autism. But yet we have a long way to go. As much as we know, there is so much more that we don't know. And so I invite all of you to be able to help us think about how to do this better, to use as a community our collective wisdom to be able to make a difference. And in particular, for the individuals and families with autism, I invite you to join the Interactive Autism Network, to be part of the solution to this, because it's going to take really a lot of us to think about what's important, what's going to be a meaningful difference. As we think about something that's potentially a solution, how well does it work? Is it something that's really going to make a difference in your lives as an individual, as a family with autism? We're going to need individuals of all ages, from the young to the old, and with all different shapes and sizes of the autism spectrum disorder to make sure that we can have an impact. So I invite all of you to join the mission and to help to be able to make the lives of individuals with autism so much better and so much richer. Thank you. Diagnosed and got.
Okay, so lovely TED Talk by that wonderful Dr. Chung. Any questions about this?
No questions, but watching all this, you know, me understand more my son.
I'm glad that. I think that sometimes it's helpful to hear like the history and where we've come from with things in our lives, including students with special needs, because it gives us a context for understanding that. Those of you who've done some of my other trainings know that I talk a lot about narratives. So the human brain is designed to come up with a story, to come up with like a cause and effect. I think that there's someone who's unmuted. I'm sorry that I keep bugging people to make sure that we're muting. So it distracts people. So the human brain is literally wired to come up with a reason that things are happening. And sometimes we come up with reasons or narratives or stories that aren't accurate. You know, sometimes we perceive things in a way that just to us make sense or seem reasonable, but they really aren't the solution. And a lot of times the stories that we tell ourselves, the narratives that we tell ourselves, we develop because they kind of fit our background, they fit other narratives that we've been fed, we've had experience with that. And so for a very long time, really up until the 1970s and 80s, people with special needs, anyone who was atypical, were not accepted at all. And most parents, when you had a child with a disability, were told to ship off your child. The best thing that you could do was send your child away to an institution, right? Even nowadays, we're in 2020, and we still have parts of our society that don't accept people with special needs. Our students sometimes are still in classrooms that are in the back portable of the campus, right? So I think it's really important for us to revisit that. I'm going to ask that, sorry, I'm going to pause. Before I play this next video, is there anyone else that has like a comment or a question that they want to make?
Dr. Rosy, what I understood is that causes autism is genetics.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So genetics, bad parenting, you know, toxic environment, none of those things are going to on its own cause autism without genetics. So what's hard for people to understand about autism is that it's not like Down syndrome where it's like one specific gene that is mutated. For most individuals, like she noted, it's a combination of genes. But the really cool thing, so 15 years ago, I went to a training in UCLA that talked about how they were identifying specific genes involved. And then now they're realizing that it's not just, you know, 30 or 40 different genes. It's these genes are typically associated with certain networks in the brain. So it's going to probably another 15 years before they really identify that it's this subcategory network of genes that are all involved in autism spectrum disorder, and how your autism demonstrates itself, what it looks like in a person, is a result of a combination. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so if everybody can really check that your button is muted, because
Can you hear me?
Sure. You have an,
okay. You know what? I don't know what's going on.
I can't hear you. I think someone was asking a question. I think it was Angie.
I'm just making sure I'm muted because it.
Okay,
Okay, but you can hear me.
so now you can push the button.
Okay, thank you.
Rosie, I think as the host, you can actually, there's an option for you to mute everybody on your end as the host.
There is, and I can't find it now. So for some reason, like I've used it before and now I can't find it on my host screen. I think I might have to like stop sharing my screen and do that. But we'll try to play this next video. It's so this video by Steve Silberman. He's going to talk about the forgotten history of autism, and I think this is a really fascinating TED Talk that talks about the two pioneers. There were two men that identified autism back in the 40s. There was Leo Kanner here in the United States, and there was Hans Asperger in Germany. And this is where that saying of like, whoever has power writes history, right? So like this is one of those things of whoever gets the most information out there and who has like the biggest clout and it like goes viral that's the information that we're going to all focus on. So I thought that this was a really fascinating talk that I want people to understand the history of autism and why I think some of our prejudices against people with autism or some of our thinking about autism come from. Okay? Thank you everybody for being mute.
Just after Christmas last year, 132 kids in California got the measles by either visiting Disneyland or being exposed to someone who'd been there. The virus then hopped the Canadian border, infecting more than 100 children in Quebec. One of the tragic things about this outbreak is that measles, which can be fatal to a child with a weakened immune system, is one of the most easily preventable diseases in the world. An effective vaccine against it has been available for more than half a century, but many of the kids involved in the Disneyland outbreak had not been vaccinated because their parents were afraid of something allegedly even worse, autism. But wait, wasn't the paper that sparked the controversy about autism and vaccines debunked, retracted, and branded a deliberate fraud by the British Medical Journal? Don't most science-savvy people know that the theory that vaccines cause autism is BS? I think most of you do. But millions of parents worldwide continue to fear that vaccines put their kids at risk for autism. Why? Here's why. This is a graph of autism prevalence estimates rising over time. For most of the 20th century, autism was considered an incredibly rare condition. The few psychologists and pediatricians who'd even heard of it figured that they would get through their entire careers without seeing a single case. For decades, the prevalence estimates remained stable at just 3 or 4 children in 10,000. But then in the 1990s, the numbers started to skyrocket. Fundraising organizations like Autism Speaks routinely referred to autism as an epidemic, as if you could catch it from another kid at Disneyland. So what's going on? If it isn't vaccines, what is it? If you ask the folks down at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta what's going on, they tend to rely on phrases like broadened diagnostic criteria and better case finding to explain these rising numbers. But that kind of language doesn't do much to allay the fears of a young mother who is searching her 2-year-old's face for eye contact. If the diagnostic criteria had to be broadened, why were they so narrow in the first place? Why were cases of autism so hard to find before the 1990s? 5 years ago, I decided to try to uncover the answers to these questions. I learned that what happened has less to do with the slow and cautious progress of science than it does with the seductive power of storytelling. For most of the 20th century, clinicians told one story about what autism is and how it was discovered. But that story turned out to be wrong, and the consequences of it are having a devastating impact on global public health. There was a second, more accurate story of autism, which had been lost and forgotten in obscure corners of the clinical literature. This second story tells us everything about how we got here and where we need to go next. The first story starts with a child psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins Hospital named Leo Kanner. In 1943, Kanner published a paper describing 11 young patients who seemed to inhabit private worlds, ignoring the people around them, even their own parents. They could amuse themselves for hours by flapping their hands in front of their faces, but they were panicked by little things like their favorite toy being moved from its usual place without their knowledge. Based on the patients who were brought to his clinic, Kanner speculated that autism is very rare. By the 1950s, as the world's leading authority on the subject, he declared that he had seen less than 150 true cases of his syndrome while fielding referrals from as far away as South Africa. That's actually not surprising, because Kanner's criteria for diagnosing autism were incredibly selective. For example, he discouraged giving the diagnosis to children who had seizures, but now we know that epilepsy is very common in autism. He once bragged that he had turned 9 out of 10 kids referred to his office as autistic by other clinicians without giving them an autism diagnosis. Kanner was a smart guy, but a number of his theories didn't pan out. He classified autism as a form of infantile psychosis caused by cold and unaffectionate parents. These children, he said, have been kept neatly in a refrigerator that didn't defrost. At the same time, however, Kanner noticed that some of his young patients had special abilities that clustered in certain areas, like music, math, and memory. One boy in his clinic could distinguish between 18 symphonies before he turned 2. When his mother put on one of his favorite records, he would correctly declare, Beethoven. But Kanner took a dim view of these abilities, claiming that the kids were just regurgitating things they'd heard their pompous parents say, desperate to earn their approval. As a result, autism became a source of shame and stigma for families, and 2 generations of autistic children were shipped off to institutions for their own good, becoming invisible to the world at large. Amazingly, it wasn't until the 1970s that researchers began to test Kanner's theory that autism was rare. Lorna Wing was a cognitive psychologist in London who thought that Kanner's theories of refrigerator parenting were bloody stupid, as she told me. She and her husband John were warm and affectionate people, and they had a profoundly autistic daughter named Susie. Lorna and John knew how hard it was to raise a child like Susie without support services, special education, and the other resources that are out of reach without a diagnosis. To make the case to the National Health Service that more resources were needed for autistic children and their families, Lorna and her colleague Judith Gould decided to do something that should have been done 30 years earlier. They undertook a study of autism prevalence in the general population. They pounded the pavement in a London suburb called Camberwell to try to find autistic children in the community. What they saw made clear that Kanner's model was way too narrow, while the reality of autism was much more colorful and diverse. Some kids couldn't talk at all, while others waxed on at length about their fascination with astrophysics, dinosaurs, or the genealogy of royalty. In other words, these children didn't fit into nice, neat boxes, as Judith put it, and they saw lots of them, way more than Kanner's monolithic model would have predicted. At first, they were at a loss to make sense of their data. How had no one noticed these children before? But then Lorna came upon a reference to a paper that had been published in German in 1944, the year after Kanner's paper, and then forgotten. buried with the ashes of a terrible time that no one wanted to remember or think about. Connor knew about this competing paper, but scrupulously avoided mentioning it in his own work. It had never even been translated into English, but luckily, Lorna's husband spoke German, and he translated it for her. The paper offered an alternate story of autism. Its author was a man named Hans Asperger, who ran a combination clinic and residential school in Vienna in the 1930s. Asperger's ideas about teaching children with learning differences were progressive even by contemporary standards. Mornings at his clinic began with exercise classes set to music, and the children put on plays on Sunday afternoons. Instead of blaming parents for causing autism, Asperger framed it as a lifelong polygenetic disability that requires compassionate forms of support and accommodations over the course of one's whole life. Rather than treating the kids in his clinic like patients, Asperger called them his little professors and enlisted their help in developing methods of education that were particularly suited to them. Crucially, Asperger viewed autism as a diverse continuum that spans an astonishing range of giftedness and disability. He believed that autism and autistic traits are common and always have been, seeing aspects of this continuum in familiar archetypes from pop culture, like the socially awkward scientist and the absent-minded professor. He went so far as to say, it seems that for success in science and art, a dash of autism is essential. Lorna and Judith realized that Connor had been as wrong about autism being rare as he had been about parents causing it. Over the next several years, they quietly worked with the American Psychiatric Association to broaden the criteria for diagnosis to reflect the diversity of what they called the autism spectrum. In the late 80s and early 1990s, their changes went into effect, swapping out Connor's narrow model for Asperger's broad and inclusive one. These changes weren't happening in a vacuum. By coincidence, as Lorna and Judith worked behind the scenes to reform the criteria, people all over the world were seeing an autistic adult for the first time. Before Rain Man came out in 1988, only a tiny ingrown circle of experts knew what autism looked like. But after Dustin Hoffman's unforgettable performance as Raymond Babbitt earned Rain Man 4 Academy Awards, pediatricians, psychologists, teachers, and parents all over the world knew what autism looked like. Coincidentally, at the same time, the first easy-to-use clinical tests for diagnosing autism were introduced. You no longer had to have a connection to that tiny circle of experts to get your child evaluated. The combination of Rain Man, the changes to the criteria, and the introduction of these tests created a network effect, a perfect storm of autism awareness. The number of diagnoses started to soar, just as Lorna and Judith predicted, indeed hoped that it would, enabling autistic people and their families to finally get the support and services they deserved. Then Andrew Wakefield came along to blame the spike in diagnoses on vaccines, a simple, powerful, and seductively believable story that was as wrong as Connor's theory that autism was rare. If the CDC's current estimate that 1 in 68 kids in America are on the spectrum is correct, autistics are one of the largest minority groups in the world. In recent years, autistic people have come together on the internet to reject the notion that they are puzzles to be solved by the next medical breakthrough, coining the term neurodiversity to celebrate the varieties of human cognition. One way to understand neurodiversity is to think in terms of human operating systems. Just because a PC is not running Windows doesn't mean that it's broken. By autistic standards, the normal human brain is easily distractible, obsessively social, and suffers from a deficit of attention to detail. To be sure, autistic people have a hard time living in a world not built for them. 80 years later, we're still catching up to Asperger, who believed that the cure for the most disabling aspects of autism is to be found in understanding teachers, accommodating employers, supportive communities, and parents who have faith in their children's potential. An autistic woman named Zosha Zaks once said, "We need all hands on deck to right the ship of humanity. As we sail into an uncertain future, we need every form of human intelligence on the planet working together to tackle the challenges that we face as a society. We can't afford to waste a brain." Thank you.
So, what are some thoughts about that talk?
I always wondered if it was passed down through mom and dad, and I guess it's not true. Through genes, it's genetic.
So there's that genetic component, right? And it's not always going to be like passed down from mom and dad. It could be just a mutation, right?
Yeah.
What are some other thoughts?
And it made me, because I had a grandson who passed away a few years ago. He was diagnosed with autism, and we just couldn't figure out because there's no one in our family, and it's like makes it clear for me.
Yep. Sometimes things just happen, right?
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
And we also are like, I know this family that the two kids are autistic, you know, and that's the only two kids that they have, and they both autistic, and one is very smart, and the other one, I mean, he's smart, but not as the oldest one. And you know, I don't, like you say,
variability.
Yeah.
I think what I was really impressed with was the information clarifying the vaccination, because that did cause an uproar. And I remember this was, you know, during the time where we were getting ready to have children. And that thought when I had my firstborn was, do I vaccinate?
Yeah.
And that I think what was scary is the misinformation that can cause more damage. Well, so much damage actually.
So there's
that was interesting.
A colleague of mine, I think that's why I wanted to show these two different talks. They're both powerful in different ways, but I have a colleague of mine who's a professor at the Autism Center at the University of Washington in Seattle, and she said that you and I had our oldest around the same time, the early 2000s, and that generation of parents and not vaccinating created the biggest public health crisis that we are not talking about, right?
Yeah.
And so, but Lisa, you said something that was really important, that how misinformation blows up and really misguides people. Yeah. We could really say the same thing about the pandemic that we're living through right now. Every day you just open your phone or your television and there's like, take this and take that and do this and don't do that, right? So it's overwhelming for people when we're trying to make decisions, particular decisions about our children. But I want to emphasize that that scandal of Dr. Wayfield's research, and eventually it was his grad students who came back and confessed that this, you know, the statistical work that he did was totally fraudulent, and he admitted that he had produced fraudulent data. Because when he published this, there was a big push to try to figure out why all of a sudden do we see an increase, you know, in autism. And our brains are wired to try to find a cause, right? And a lot of times answers are not the answers that we're looking for. The answer is it's complicated. It's a lot of genes and it's a lot of different things, right? It's not a simple thing, a simple answer. So when he published that, worlds of celebrities embraced that. you know, Jenny McCarthy with her child with autism, she was one of the biggest advocates for the anti-vax movement, right?
Mhm.
Politicians got involved in it. So,
well, those are the biggest influencers to the public. Is
They are.
if I see a celebrity or if I see a politician, I'm going to go that route because it takes a lot of work to really do your own research, and you're going to trust those, you know, in the public eye, which is just seems to be the common, and they know that.
Yeah,
they know that too.
And sadly that doesn't change, right? We're
No.
in 2020 and that's still kind of the factor. But I do remember when I was giving my now 17-year-old his first vaccine, I literally, and I was a grad student at the time, and you know, I had direct access to like, oh no, that's not accurate. There was that little seed in me as like, oh my gosh, am I doing something to my baby, right?
I think every mom who had a baby late 90s to, you know, the 2000s suffered with that doubt. And but you know, thank God, you know, those of us who did, you know, made the right choice. I think that, well, yeah, in vaccinating. Yeah.
Right. But do we see the evolution? There was a time in the 30s through the 60s that parents were blamed, particularly their mother, right? And the impact that has, that had for generations. And then we blame vaccines, and we're still dealing with that, right? Other thoughts about this last talk?
I liked how he shared the statistics about the prevalence of autism and how it related more to the understanding of what autism was, as opposed to it being just diagnosed more or just more prevalent nowadays.
Yeah, I felt like that was a really profound statement. And I remember when I was a grad student, it was predominantly Leo Kanner's work that we would all read in all of our classes. And when I started reading Hans Asperger, who Asperger syndrome was named after, and now remember, there's no specific separate diagnosis of Asperger syndrome, it's just all autism spectrum disorder. When I started reading his work, I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is a totally different perspective. Now, when Steve was reading Dr. Asperger's work on autism, what did that sound like to you guys when he was reading that? You know, it required teachers and services and individualization, and he saw them as little professors as opposed to being something broken. Inclusivity. What did you guys think of? What did that make you think of?
The inclusion environment that we use.
Embracing and not finding, I think more the embracing of how people are different, but yet have something to offer. And I think he was trying to just make things like, it's not to look at them as not normal human beings. And it's sad that his work was lost for so long. My question was, who were the two people who really brought him into sight?
Judith? So Dr. Lorna Wing. Lorna, Lorna Wing.
Okay.
And I'm totally blanking on Dr. Gould, right? Judith Gould?
I think so. I just heard the first name, yeah. Judith Gould.
Dr. Lorna Wing is one of the bigger names in the broadening of the definition of autism. Any other thoughts about like how Dr. Asperger's described autism in the 40s and what world we live in as special educators?
Well, I think the definitions are kind of difficult because I have mixed feelings about the DSM taking out Asperger's and not having that separation. Because I think when obviously I totally understand autism as a spectrum disorder, but I think when you're looking at an individual who is in public school in a general education classroom with a little bit of support versus a completely nonverbal child who cannot safely cross the street, it's really hard for my mind to put them in the same category of as having autism. So I think the definitely that broadening of the definition accounts for that jump. And it would be interesting if they could take cases from like the 70s and 80s and re-diagnose those kids to see if the prevalence has actually increased with the definition change or not. But
And there have been some studies that have done that and documented that, yes, yeah, that the prevalence rate does go up. Any other thoughts?
I think as a group, we've become much better at diagnosing. I started my career in early intervention, and that's kind of been a subject that's been debated for a long time. The earlier we catch them, hence babies being tested, the earlier we catch them and start trying to almost guide their neurons to function in a different level, or in a different pathway, so that they can start to educate themselves almost. And the 3 to 5 year olds that we worked with, we watched every day. I think that's true for every 3 to 5 year old, that they're like little sponges, so they suck it up. But I'm always happy to see the kids start as early as possible. I think that Dr. Asperger's profile of what he describes for their education is so close to what we're doing today, by finding their strengths and in their non-preferred, yet heightening their preferred method of education. Every single kid is different, and every single kid with autism is different. So it's interesting. It's all interesting.
It is very interesting, and it kind of makes us, to me, when I was watching this TED Talk, I was like, it's fascinating how the researchers, and of course, Dr. Asperger didn't work in a vacuum by himself. He had his colleagues and people that were like-minded, but it made me think of us as special educators. We live in special education with our students with special needs, including our students with ASD, and we don't see them as broken. Right? We see them as students who have learning needs, and we are the gifted ones at meeting those needs, at being creative, at thinking outside the box to meet the student where they are, and helping them. Again, it's not to fix or cure, but to just help them continue to grow and have as many options as they can in life and experience joy in learning. But as much as we love our gen ed colleagues, that's not the message that our special ed students get. And I'm not talking about just our kids on the autism spectrum. I'm talking about students who are not in the typical learning profile. The message that they get, whether you're an ADHD kid or a child with emotional disturbance or autism, is that you don't belong. Right? There's something wrong with you because you can't perform exactly the same way as Susie and Billy and Bob. And so, education, we're going through these revolutions in education, and you see that in autism. That's why I wanted to share these videos, because in 20 years, education is going to look so different because of students with behavioral issues, right? So because of the ED students, because of the students with impulse issues and ADHD, we used to blame autism on parenting. We now scientifically know that's not valid. But who do we blame parents for? Creating ED and for ADHD, right? And for all sorts of behavioral issues. Well, it's just because they're manipulative. They're used to getting away with it at home, right? So I'm going to end on that note, is that we constantly evolve in science. We see it in this pandemic. At the beginning of this, don't wear masks in public. And now they're like, no, wear masks, right? So our job as educators is to be constantly, hopefully be surrounded by community of learning so that our skills are developing. Because when our skills are developing, when our narratives are being shifted and changed, when we're growing our skill set, then we get to impart that to the students that we support, okay? So I know that we really didn't get to dive into the PowerPoint that I sent you, but I really feel like having these discussions about the history of autism, the prevalence, the genetic component, the way that it used to be framed and the way it's framed now is just as important as me doing whatever PowerPoint I'm doing with you. And in fact, I think it's going to complement. So for my next training on the Affirm modules, I'm just going to continue. We're going to pick up on the PowerPoint, which I will show you really quickly what it will pick up.
Is it too late to register for your second one? I didn't know that.
No, it isn't. Nope, you can still, if you sign up today or tomorrow, you totally sign up. So
Okay.
when we pick up, we're going to talk about a very brief history lesson on applied behavior analysis, which is the main scientific approach for addressing the needs of student learners with autism. And we're going to go into like founders of applied behavior analysis and talking a little bit about historical interventions for these students. And then we'll talk about Dr. Lovas and his incredible work at UCLA and how that changed the field of autism and really the field of education, period. And then the current founders of naturalistic ABA approaches, including PRT that we'll talk about. Most of the info that I will share with you guys is not going to be in the Affirm module on naturalistic and PRT. There'll be some overlap, clearly, but you don't be like, oh, I don't want to waste my time in watching those modules because Rosy's going to cover everything. I'm not going to cover everything in those modules. Those modules do a beautiful job of going very detail specific. I'm giving you guys kind of the behind the scenes look, given that that was my training at UCSB. So with that being said, I'm going to thank everybody for participating. I thank everybody for being here. I'm hoping that you guys walked away with a sense of this being a community that we all support each other. I wish you all well. And if you have any questions, I'm going to stick around for the next 5 to 10 minutes. Otherwise, please feel free to just email or text me independently if you have something you don't want to ask in the group. Thank you guys and have a great week.
Thanks, Rosie.
Rosie?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Rosie,
Thank
one
you.
thing, and then on, my brother has 3 sons. They're all fully on the full set spectrum.
Wow.
1, 2, and then the one son on the lowest, end, we were able to teach him to warm up his stuff in the microwave based on his love for baseball.
That's incredible.
What did the scoreboard look like? And this is how the scoreboard looked like. Punch up how the scoreboard says, and then press this button, and he is able to heat up his treats.
That's incredible.
Wow.
We use the same thing for him cleaning his room. This is team A and this is team B. He's going to get their stuff. I remember one day sitting with him. He's playing his Xbox, one controller on each knee, and totally mad when he loses. He's using both things. I mean, really beating him, fighting against himself, and still mad when he lost.
Sweet
It
boy.
was incredible.
Hey, next week, Joan, when we talk about motivation and using children's perseverative interests, would you bring this up for the whole group if you're coming?
Sure, I plan to come. I plan to sign up right after we sign off.
I love that. I, as a clinician and as like a behavior specialist, I love finding out what people are motivated by, and our students with ASD a lot of times have these very specific interests. And we had a little guy who's not so little now. He's 22 and he's going to Parks College, doing very beautiful. But he was very resistant to learning to read when he was in kindergarten, first grade. He would just really have a lot of disruptive behaviors and avoid. But at that time, he was obsessed. His perceptive interest was paper development in ancient China. Don't ask me how he got interested in this, but he knew everything there was to know. And this is really before the internet, right? This is like in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so we created all sorts of, with his teacher, who was brilliant, all sorts of little reading primers based on his perseverative interest. And for the first number of years in school, whenever there was a writing assignment, it would be really based on whatever his perseverative interest at the point in time was. And for a long time, it was ancient China paper milling, and then it became coins in Rome, and And now he wants to become a linguist, and he's like taught himself how to speak 7 different languages.
Yeah.
It's really cool, given that he didn't really start speaking until he was 4.5. So I was like, now
Well, also with my nephew, I mean, he would go through the paperwork, in really simple paperwork, get it all done. They graduate him to the next book, and he freeze.
Yeah.
So we took the papers out of the old book, and every other one we put a page of the old book, and then slowly started taking every other page and every 3 pages, and then till it was old hat. He
So
just continued working.
I want you again. You're gonna do the presentation with me next week, because when we talk about interspersing maintenance with acquisition, that's a brilliant example. Yes, I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rosie, is the next training you're doing on the 29th, or are you doing one before that?
Mine should be the 29th.
The 29th. Okay.
Let me check. Let me triple check. Yeah, I don't think I do. Yes, the 29th. I don't do one next week. I'm doing the 29th.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Rosie, how
Thank
many
you.
trainings are you doing? Is it just this one and the 29th?
Yes, and then in May, I really invite you guys to join us for the ones in May.
Okay.
You're all gonna love it. So the ones in May, we are doing conscious discipline. So they're going to be a series of trainings on this model for supporting students through disruptive behavior. And it's developed by Dr. Becky Bailey out in Florida, and it's marvelous. And it's going to be very much like today was, which we're going to watch some videos, and then we are going to have discussion time. Okay.
It's called conscious discipline.
Yeah. So if you Google it, it's yeah.
Conscious discipline
Can we sign
is
up
great.
now
I
for May?
Googled that. And
Oh, I can't hear you.
Can we sign up now for the May classes?
I don't think that they've been put up yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Someone.
Rosie, Justin did not put the 29th as an option for us. He only put up to the 27th.
You can sign up. I mean,
Okay.
There's no reason that you can't. It's open to everybody across Santa Barbara County.
Okay. All right.
There was
Thank
a
you.
gentleman who was saying something.
I wanted to ask something. I don't know if somebody else did.
Go ahead, Lori.
Okay, I have a question being with genetics and whatnot and talking about the refrigerator mother. Is it possible that they thought the refrigerator mother was the cause because when they used ABA, not calling it ABA back then, I guess, but that positive reinforcement, they're saying, well, you're nurturing and you're positive. That's why the kid is,
Yeah.
you know.
Back in the 30s and 40s, when this was Bruno Bettelheim's main theory, they didn't have ABA. So this was, they hadn't invented this teaching approach. So what they did is they based all of this on case studies. So you also have to remember that during the 30s and 40s, when this theory became practiced, Freudian psychology was like the main way of kind of looking at psychology and looking at human development, right? So again, it's whatever the story and whatever the scientists, the leading experts are at the time, that influences our entire narrative about things, right?
Right.
So in that time frame, Freudian theory, psychoanalysis was like the dominant approach to looking at, human struggle or human maladaptive behavior. And while there's some great things that came out of Freud's work, women got blamed for that stuff,
Yeah, I have another question real quick.
Yep.
Regarding the diagnosis of it all. We talk about how there's so many more cases of it, but can it also be underdiagnosed, being that it's such a wide spectrum and you have the higher functioning? I'm sorry, that's my refrigerator. But that's what I was curious of, even like adults that might be struggling, but they're so high functioning, and they've never been diagnosed. I mean, can they be diagnosed at that age?
Yes. So there's a really fascinating TED Talk, which maybe I'll share it with you guys next week. Otherwise, I'll email it to you all, of a woman who didn't get diagnosed until adulthood. I believe she's from New Zealand. And she talks a lot about how she suffered her entire life. And I think she's in she was diagnosed in her early 20s. And there are individuals that over my 22 years in being in special education and specifically autism through UCSB, where we met adults whose children were diagnosed, and the father would say, I'm pretty sure that this is me. And they would go and get evaluated and they would meet criteria. And so Steve Silberman's talk, the rate was like 1 in every 68. Right now, the CDC says it's 1 in every 54. And part of that is that there are individuals like our age, right, that they were just the weird kid. They were the kid that dropped out of school, right? We romanticize and sensationalize the genius savants, right? That the kid that at 4th grade takes the GED and then goes to Harvard, right? But for every one of those cases, there are dozens and dozens of people suffering and struggling. Years ago, I met a man in his 80s who has, over a channel of referrals, this is like 5 years ago, when I was in private practice, got referred to me because his daughter, who was 55 at the time, was an agoraphobe and a hoarder. And he didn't understand, what was going on. And I met her and I was like, oh gosh, pretty sure that she's on the autism spectrum, and like referred her to, be evaluated. And guess what? In her 50s, she was diagnosed, right? So, and she had suffered greatly and developed all of these secondary issues with anxiety and depression. And that's something that we can, talk about a little bit, is that this, again, not only do symptoms change with age, but with age, additional conditions can also develop, right? So the high comorbidity with, anxiety and depression